We continue our service, our series on the book of Exodus, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot. Now, by way of review, previously in our series Exodus, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot, TM, we saw Moses driven out of Egypt, and he saves the daughters of Jethro, of Ruel, and he is willing to dwell with this individual, with Jethro and his daughters, and one of the daughters, Zipporah, is given to him as wife, and he has a son named Gershom because he has been a sojourner, a ger, Gershom, stranger there, in a foreign land, stranger in a foreign land, sojourner in a foreign land. It came about in the course of these many days that the king of Egypt died, Pharaoh died, 40 years have gone by. The sons of Israel cried because of their bondage. They cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So the people of Israel cry out finally to God, not just groaning because it's not easy being a slave, but crying out to the Lord to deliver them, and God hears their groanings. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we spent the remainder of the last portion of our message last week reviewing the basic components of the Abrahamic Covenant, which underlies, is the foundation for all that comes from here on out. Everything that, every action, every reaction, everything that comes from this point is dependent on the promises contained within the Abrahamic Covenant. In fact, we even saw in our Torah portion today how important the Abrahamic Covenant is. It was referenced right there in Deuteronomy chapter 1. So let us break new ground. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them 4 times. In these 2 verses, we see God reacting to the suffering of his people. That is going to lead to our divine encounter, which we'll see today in chapter 3 of the book of Exodus. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, Ruel, his father-in-law. Jethro is his title, Ruel is his name, friend of God. His father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness. And he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So here we are. This is the Nile Delta right here. This is where the action is right here. Whoops. This is where the action is. The cities of Egypt that the Jewish people, the slaves, built are right here. But we are now in the area of Midian. Now Midian extends from Sinai, this portion, the eastern end of Sinai, all the way into the Arabian desert here, this whole entire area known as Arabia in biblical times. And the traditional location, I'm not saying that this is for sure where Mount Sinai is, but this is where it is received. This is the received tradition. And this, if you wanted to visit Mount Sinai today, it's Jebel Musa, the mountain of Moses. This is where we are. And this is what that mountain looks like from a navigatable pass. So that's the mountain of Moses, the mountain of Sinai. So in the course of Moses' shepherding duties, and Moses, remember, 40 years has gone by. Moses is now 80 years of age. And he's been a shepherd since we left him. We left him basically with a new wife and a new child, and that's the last we heard of Moses until now. Okay? So he is shepherding, and he leads the sheep to the mountain Horeb. We heard it mentioned today in the Deuteronomy portion, in the Torah portion. That's the term that's used interchangeably with Sinai. The mountain itself, Sinai, is really more of a range, right? It's the mountain range, the range of Horeb. And so these terms are used interchangeably. And this is the same mountain where later in the narrative, God is going to give the Israelites his Torah in Exodus chapter 19. And what we're going to see here is that Moses is going to encounter the visible manifestation of God's presence. That's the Shekinah glory, the Shekinah glory, the Shekinah. He's going to see the visible manifestation of God's presence in a flaming thorn bush. Now, the angel of the Lord appeared to him, to Moses, in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous, this unique, this unprecedented sight. Why, the bush is not burned up, is not consumed. This is the kind of bush. It's got a particular Latin name. It's a bush. It's a thorn bush. It's indigenous to the region of Sinai. And today on Mount Sinai, this is the official bush. The claim is that this is a clip. It grew from a clipping of the original burning bush. Well, be that as it may, nonetheless, this is the kind of bush that would have been burning. So now these are little bushes. They grow throughout the Sinai wilderness. And, because of the intense heat and dryness, the heat that we're experiencing right now, my friends, this is not a dry heat. This is a very wet heat. They're talking about dry heat, dry enu. And because of the dryness of the desert air and the deficiency of rain, these little bushes can sporadically and spontaneously combust. And they burn up. But what Moses witnessed was truly unique because the flame keeps burning. It doesn't consume the bush. It's the bush, it's the nature equivalent of the candles on the birthday cake that you can blow, but they won't blow out. The fire still burns, right? The strange sight arrests Moses' attention. Now, he's been leading sheep around this area for 40 years. He's never seen anything like this, and he moved closer to investigate. Now, what I want to share with you is that as Moses moved closer to the bush and he saw it continuing to burn, it was an extremely unique situation because not only did it burn continuously like candles on the cake that simply won't blow out, but that was unique enough. But this gets exceedingly unique because this bush, which burns and does not extinguish itself, also speaks. This is about as unique as we get. Now, the use of the term, let's get to this passage. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush. Wait a second. How did God get in that bush? Wait a minute. Gets back in. Oh, it says in verse 2. So that's why you have to read so carefully. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of the bush. Okay, I got it now. Based on verse 2, I know that what's happening is that there's an angel who's causing the bush to burn, and it's an angel of the Lord. But then I go to the verse 4 here, and it says that God called. So who's there, an angel of the Lord or the Lord? The angel of the Lord is the Lord. By the way, this is why, we'll see in a moment, when the God identifies himself on the bush as I am, and when Yeshua says before Abraham was, in John chapter 8, before Abraham was, I am, it's an indication that it is the second person of the Trinity who is speaking to Moses from this bush. When we see the angel of the Lord in the Hebrew Bible, it generally is a manifestation of a physical manifestation of the Lord. My take is that this is the second person of the Godhead who is speaking. So God called, now that will take later revelation, obviously, that takes New Testament revelation. But the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Hebrew Bible revealed. Right? The Lord saw that he turned aside to look, and God called him from the midst of the bush. Said, Moses, Moses, here I am. There's no ambiguity that he's talking to an angel, because it simply says God is speaking. That's the end of the discussion. And he said, here I am. And Moses is going to call the individual with whom he's having a conversation, he's going to call him both God and the Lord. See right there in verse 4, the Lord saw, God called. When the Lord recognized that he had aroused Moses' curiosity, he calls to him. You know, there's a pattern in Scripture that's very, very important to recognize. And it's the repetition of a name. And the repetition of a name, like we see here, Moses, Moses, indicates an emphatic call. And it's an emphatic call for a specific commission. When someone is going to be tasked with a specific call on their lives, a specific duty, a specific ministry, a specific job, the pattern is generally this. God calls out the name not once, but twice. Like this, Moses, Moses. Elsewhere, Abraham, Abraham. Again with Yaakov, Yaakov. With Samuel, Shmuel, Shmuel. And in the New Testament, with the Apostle Paul, Shaul, Shaul. And Moses also shares now in the response of his forefathers Abraham and Jacob, and with one to come, with an Israelite to come, Samuel, he responds exactly the same way, which is the way that one's supposed to respond when you receive a divine call for a specific commission. And that is to say, Hineni, here I am. And then he said, God, the Lord, said, do not come near here. Because why? Because he could get burned? No, that's not the reason. Do not come near here. Keep a distance. And in fact, even from the distance, remove your sandals from your feet. For the place on which you're standing is holy ground. So God had personally summoned Moses into his presence, right? So God had called Moses to get close, but not too close. And in fact, he instructs Moses in the appropriate manner in which to approach his presence. In the biblical world, the removal of footwear was a sign of humility. Removal of the footwear was a sign of respect. And Moses was reminded of God's awesome holiness. We sang today about God's holiness. And Moses was also reminded that because of God's present manifestation in this particular locality, right there on the mountain of Sinai, the ground on which he stood was holy ground. There's nothing inherently holy about a geographic area, but when God is manifest, when God is present, it is God's presence that creates a geographic atmosphere surrounding God's presence of holiness. And God continues speaking in verse 6. And he said also, I am the God of your father. And I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Yitzchak. And I am the God of Yaakov. And then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Was the burning bush the manifestation, a physical manifestation, a physical and visible manifestation of the glory of God? Of course it was. Was it God himself? Of course it was. Was God someone he could see? Yes. That's why Moses hid his face. He's not looking at someone who's invisible. He looked at something that was someone who was very, very visible, who was spectacularly visible. And he was afraid to look. How bright was that bush that burned without being consumed? My assumption is fairly bright, because if it's somewhere up on that range and Moses is down on the plain, and where's that soggy plain? At Sinai, of course. Moses is down there with his sheep. How is he going to notice something up there? It's going to be pretty bright. And Moses, even keeping somewhat of a distance, not touching or coming totally near to the bush, it's still going to be so bright. And Moses is going to turn away, afraid to look at God. So there's no question that God is here, because God is now revealing himself very, very clearly as the God of Israel's fathers, of the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And don't think of that formula as a preamble before God introduces the topic at hand. That is the topic at hand. The mention of the patriarchs, the Jewish patriarchs, would have served as an electrifying reminder that God had not forgotten the ancient promises he had made. Where did he make them? In the Abrahamic Covenant. God's actions are only decipherable and understandable in light of what has gone before and laid down in the Abrahamic Covenant, which takes up so much literary real estate of Genesis and is referenced over and over again, even in this instance, in a sense, in a shorthand, by simply referencing God himself saying, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the God who made promises to the Israelite forefathers. And the Lord is going to reference all three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, throughout his dialogue with Moses and throughout his instruction with him. It's not that God stutters, or it's not that God repeats himself because he forgets. He's repeating for emphasis. It's not only important for Moses to get this, it's important for the reader to get this. And this reminder of God's splendor, of who God is, arouses fear in Moses. Awe, fear. To behold this awesome God might result in his death. See, Moses is 80 years old as it is. I don't know if if this was dialogue left out of the transaction, but, well, do you want to give me a heart attack? I'm 80 years of age. Easy with the revelation. But nonetheless, Moses is fearful. Our God in Exodus is an awesome God. And he's a fearsome God. He's a God with power. A wondrous God who's awesome to behold. Well, we now move into another development in the narrative where the divine encounter becomes a matter of divine compassion. God's divine compassion. That's why it's divine compassion, not Moses' compassion. It's divine compassion, and that divine compassion will generate a divine commission for Moses, which we got a heads up with the Moses, with the repetition of the name. But here it is laid out. The Lord said, now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty. Now we get to business. The Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. How many ways can God say, I'm paying attention? How many ways can God say in one statement that I love my people, I care about my people, and I am about to get involved? I have seen, not just seen, I've surely seen the affliction. And I have heard, I've given heed to their cry. And I am aware of their sufferings. Don't miss in verse 7 here a pregnant phrase. And that phrase, my people. My people, this phrase is commonly used throughout the Exodus narrative to highlight God's identification of the Hebrews, of the Israelites, as his own personal possession. Whose are the Israelites? They are God's. They are my people. He says that in Exodus of no other people. Wow. What's going to happen, Lord? Verse 8. So, and that's a very heavy so. I have come down. I am getting personally involved. I have watched. I have listened. I have heard. I have observed. I have remembered from a distance long enough. Now I have come down to deliver them. Whom? My people, the Israelites. To deliver them from the power of the Egyptians. And to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land. To a land flowing with milk and honey. To the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. So, God is heading up, if you will, a rescue operation. He is about to rescue his people. He envisions this rescue operation, and he is going to be directly involved. It's not just passing it off to an underling, a trusted No, he's going to directly be involved in that rescue operation that he is envisioning here. He will not only free the Israelites from their slavery, but he will bring them out of Egypt and into their inheritance, the land of promise, the land flowing with milk and honey. That's the traditional descriptive shorthand for the promised land. Milk and honey. It's just a poetic way of saying conditions of agricultural abundance. Now, it's not going to be easy because the people are not in that land right now. They're in another land, so there's several components here. The people are in another land, and they're not free to go and come and go as they want. They're enslaved. And that land, flowing with milk and honey, the land of promise, where is it promised? In the Abrahamic Covenant, it is currently occupied by 7 different nations. But remember, Genesis 15, part of the Abrahamic Covenant, the sins of these people, from the time of Abraham now to the time of Moses, 400 or so years, 4 centuries or so, the sins have now multiplied sufficiently that God can be considered and would be considered just in punishing these squatters in the land and bringing the Jewish people into the land to replace them. But they will not leave of their own accord. They will need to be conquered, vanquished, and removed. Now, behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. God once again reiterates his identity as the one who sees his people, the one who hears his people. I have seen, the cry has come. I see, I hear. I am the one who feels compassion for my people. So God hears, he sees, he feels, and what he feels is compassion. Thank God that he is powerful enough not just to wring his metaphorical hands, but to actually get those hands involved in this rescue operation. Therefore, come now. This is where Moses fits in. And I will send you to Pharaoh so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. Well, if God is the one who hears, if God is the one who sees, if God is the one who feels, if God is the one who wants to get involved, then what does that have to do with Moses? God works through individuals. Right? God could, with a snap of his fingers, accomplish anything he wants to with a mere word, a fragment of a word. But God chooses to work through individuals, flawed individuals. There's no individual who's ever lived without flaws. One special case. But Moses, like you, like me, is a flawed human. But he's going to be the one whom God is going to work through. Moses is to return to Egypt to deliver the Hebrews. How would it feel, I wonder, when it's revealed straight from the voice of God, from a burning bush, that you are to be the instrument, the chosen instrument of God's redemption of God's special people? I dare say that would be absolutely overwhelming to anyone, even someone with the experience, the life experience, the education, the upbringing, and frankly the age of Moses. Now, notice there's 2 components to this commission for Moses. This is what's called literary foreshadowing, so that there's no surprises when you get to the end of the Torah and you realize that Moses was never promised to be able to go into the promised land. It was never part of God's program for Moses to enter the promised land. What does he give him? Come, I will send you to Pharaoh. Commission part 1. Commission part 2, you will bring my people out of Egypt. And into the land of promise, right? Into the land flowing with milk and honey. No. No. Literary foreshadowing. God doesn't make promises and then take them back. Moses' commission stopped short at the border of the land that flows with milk and honey. And now, we are going to see the first of four objections that Moses is going to raise to God. He'll raise 5 in all, but now is just the first one, the objections that God will hear from the mouth of Moses. And each objection of the first 4 will produce corresponding divine reassurance. Watch how this works, right? But Moses said to God, that should floor you as a reader, having read chapter 1, verses 1 through 10, a divine encounter, God speaks directly, burning bush, a whole thing, and Moses speaks back to God. Moses not only speaks back to God, he objects to his role in God's plan. That's what I call chutzpah. Right? Moses said to, that should just absolutely arrest your attention, but Moses said to God. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? That I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? Who are you? You're Charlton Heston. Or for a newer generation, you're Batman. Yeah, who are you? For Chuck Heston, this shouldn't be too big of a problem, right? But Moses doesn't see himself as Charlton Heston. He doesn't see himself as Ben-Hur. He only sees himself as Moses, the fugitive. Moses, the rejected former would-be deliverer. He's all too aware that with 40 years having gone by, he's not the same man he was 40 years ago. He's no longer an Egyptian prince. He's an obscure shepherd. He no longer possessed that strong former sense of divine identity that we see him having in the previous chapters. And his first of 4 objections is that of personal inability to accomplish a task of this magnitude. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, that I should deliver the sons of Israel? So objection number 1, who am I to fulfill this commission, divine or otherwise? Who am I to fulfill this commission? Let's see how God responds. And God responds, he said, certainly I will be with you. And this shall be the sign to you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. So if we look at God's response, we see, first of all, there's an assurance of God's abiding personal presence. And if you're assured of God's personal abiding presence, that should, theoretically, empower Moses' feeling of sufficiency. So whether you feel it or not, you know that God is with you, therefore you are sufficient to the task. Now, in the Torah, worshiping God at the mountain where this encounter is happening is an important point. But if I were Moses, I don't know if I were Moses, if it were me, I'd ask, that's going to be the sign when I finally arrive at Sinai, 150 miles down the road, months later, weeks later, however long it's going to be, only then will I receive confirmation that you're going to be with me? It's nice to know after the fact to have some confirmation, but it's still an objection that stands, right? If the people of Israel are delivered out of Egypt to the mountain of Sinai, and that's the confirmation when they worship God. See, I told you I was with you all along. Well, that doesn't do anything for Moses while he's at Sinai. But nonetheless, we look at this objection. Who am I to fulfill this commission? This is the response. The objection number one, the response number one. It doesn't matter who you are, Moses. It doesn't matter who you are. What matters is who I am, and that I will be with you. And if I will be with you, that will be it. It's all you need. But then Moses said to God, objection number two coming, behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? So objection number two, Moses is reasoning that, all right, although arriving at Mount Sinai after the fact is going to prove confirmation after that fact. Until that point, what's going to motivate the Hebrews to trust that Moses can actually deliver them? Because Moses, remember, is not only facing the obstacle of going to Pharaoh and delivering this really big ask, but he also has to go back to a people, his people, the Israelites, who you'll remember rejected him as the deliverer. So not only may Pharaoh not respond, but my people, my own people, your people, might not respond. How would they know? How would they trust that Moses would actually deliver them? He himself, Moses, might be keenly aware of God's personal abiding presence. But how would the Israelites, how would God's people be certain of Moses' divine commission? So, here's the objection number two. What's your name? By what name shall I identify you? What name shall you be called? And God responds to Moses with a revelation of, first, the essence, and second, the substance behind his personal name. God says to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God furthermore said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, here's the formula again, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God who gave the Abrahamic Covenant, in other words, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That God, that one, has sent me to you, and my name is I am. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations. The personal name of the Lord is what we call the Tetragrammaton. It's, in English, YHVH. And we don't even actually know for sure what the correct pronunciation is, but we use substitutions like the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, so that we don't pronounce the name of the Lord incorrectly, or that we don't pronounce it correctly, rather, and thereby take his name in vain. That's why we can sing a song like we sang this morning, He is Jehovah, because I am absolutely convinced that Jehovah is not the correct pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton of the ineffable name of God. Right? The actual pronunciation was only pronounced once a year in the temple at Yom Kippur by the high priest, and so we have an uncertainty, and the uncertainty has to do with the lack of vowels. Remember Hebrew? Those of you in Hebrew class, you know that Hebrew doesn't have vowels in it, it just has consonants. So if you don't have the vowels presented in the scripture, then you could be substituting any number of vowels and any number of combination to get the correct pronunciation. So we simply avoid saying what we think the pronunciation is. But ayah, asher, ayah, I am what I am, it's the Hebrew to be, right? Not to be or not to be, but to be. Like I am, and it's no tenses there. It could be any tense. I was who I was. I am who I am. I will be whom I will be. Comes from the verb to be. And what that means is that the Lord is the timeless one, the ultimate cause, the ever-present one. And so the theological term, this word I am, is the designation that Jesus, that Yeshua uses in John chapter 8 to designate his deity, to designate, to remind them. Does that sound like familiar terminology to you? It should. Exodus chapter 3, burning bush. I'm using the terminology to demonstrate to you that I am the guy speaking from the burning bush, that God, that's me. I was there. And that's why the Jewish authorities, when Jesus makes this claim in chapter 8, pick up stones to stone him because they believe it's blasphemy. You can see this allusion back in the covenantal revelation when Revelation refers to Yeshua as the one who was, and the one who is, and the one who is to come, the one who will come. Now, this is not the first time the Hebrews learned the actual name of God. This name is placed in the mouth of speakers 30 times, more maybe, in the book of Genesis. Israel is not, until Exodus 3, Israel's not worshiping some nameless deity known only by a description like El or El Shaddai and the like. In fact, it could be argued that the name I am, the name Jehovah, incorrect pronunciation, is not a new name. Otherwise, how would that serve as a sign to the Israelites? They knew this name. But Moses wanted to remind his people that this is the name. This is the covenant name. This is the Abrahamic Covenant name. This is the name by which God always wished to be known, always wished to be worshipped. The name that expresses his character as the God who both remembers his covenant and keeps his promises. So, go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, God, Isaac, and Jacob, one more time, has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. Once again, revealing the concern of God for his people. So I said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and to the Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey. Are you seeing some repetition here for emphasis? They will pay heed to what you say. And you, with the elders of Israel's going to buy what you're selling, Moses, not to worry. They're going to come with you to the king of Egypt. And you'll say to them, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness. Then we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. So, but I know, God says, the king of Egypt, Pharaoh will not permit you to go except under compulsion. So I'll stretch out my hand. I will strike Egypt with all the miracles that I shall do in the midst of it. And after that, he will let you go. So objection number 2, by what name shall you be called? And that was a very long answer that God gave to get to this response. Call me by a name that reflects 1, my divine essence, and 2, my redemptive substance. Jewish people and Messianics, people who participate in the world of Messianics, they turn themselves upside down and inside out worrying about what kind of terminology to use. Ooh, he said Jesus instead of Yeshua. Ooh, he said this name for God instead of Hashem or instead of some other name, etc., etc. What is important according to God about how you refer to him is that when you speak of him, you speak about who he is, that he is the eternal one, the one who was, who is, and who is to come. You take the verb to be and you say, how do you apply that to God? You can't, because he's timeless. There's no boundaries. His divine essence. He was, he is, and he's Einstein's theory of relativity and then some, right? Einstein only touches on a way for us to be able to comprehend how God is outside of time. But not only is his divine essence eternal, who he is, his substance, what he's about is redemption. What he's about is taking care of his people, of when his people are suffering, when his people cry out to them. He hears them. He sees their suffering. He feels compassion, but he's not an impotent, powerless God. He is a powerful God whose heart is set on redeeming his people. If it means getting involved personally in liberating a people who are enslaved, or even ultimately if it means sending the Son to die so that all could be redeemed. Well, we've only hit 2 objections and 2 responses. There's 2 more. Can you believe? I mean, after hearing just 2 responses, I think I'd be done and say, okay, but I don't know. I'm not in the sandals. Well, Moses is not in the sandals either because it's holy ground. But I'm not standing where Moses was standing or cowering where Moses was. Maybe I would respond the same way. Maybe you would too. I cannot believe that the passage doesn't end here with Moses saying, yes, sir, and going. But if you can believe it, there's not just 2 more objections. There is a 3rd objection. 2 more objections that will receive kind and loving, reassuring responses. But then, the 5th objection, and that will be an objection too far. What are these objections? What is that objection too far? Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you in suspense. We'll pick up the narrative next week.